My name is Ari, and I lead product marketing here at Clumio. And as Ron was mentioning, Clumio is the leader for cloud native backup and recovery. So if you have applications running on AWS, great presentation by Ramesh, by the way. But some of the platforms he was talking about, if you run applications on those platforms, Clumio is a leader in backup and recovery for those applications and platforms. So this forum that Ron has put together through this interface is a really good one for us to connect. So we do backup and recovery, but before we dive into backup and recovery, right, I really want to cover the fundamentals of what a cloud native application within AWS can look like. So if we take AWS as the cloud provider, and we kind of delve into the critical components of an application, right? The first part of it is compute. Now, on AWS, compute platforms are generally synonymous with like EC2 or EKS. Ramesh mentioned Lambda as well. So one question we get from our customers very often is, hey, do I need to back up compute platforms? Well, here's the thing. Compute platforms themselves don't persist any data, right? So it's mostly ephemeral data within the compute platform, but the idea is to identify where or which services, these compute services, actually persist data to. So in AWS, most often that's either Elastic Block Store or S3, or sometimes high performance file systems like EFS or FSX. So these are generally the most popular storage platforms that these compute platforms essentially persist data to. And if you have critical data in them, you should identify that and proceed to back that up. And likewise, architect for disaster recovery using replication or whatever technique you decide. So here we have compute and we have storage, but most applications, as we all know, need some sort of schema between these two levels. And for that, you need databases. So because databases also persist data, it's generally a good practice to get all of that data backed up using techniques like database snapshots, transaction logs for continuous backups and point-in-time recovery, time streams for things like DynamoDB. And then not only do you have, I've used DynamoDB and RDS as examples here, but you also have other forms of database, like self-hosted databases. You could be using, Microsoft SQL Server on EC2. You could be using third-party databases such as MongoDB. You could be using data warehouses such as Redshift. And a majority of these data services that have critical data, you'd probably want to back up or architect DR for. So far, we've kind of accounted for the compute layer and the persistent layer, right? So the next obvious place to go is the network layer. And I know some of the presenters on this call talked a little bit about this. From a backup and recovery standpoint, of these like VPCs, DNS, load balancers, CDNs, there's not much really to back up except for like their config files. So generally what we see customers do is that, especially in like regulated industries where compliance is a requirement, they store those configurations on a periodic basis in a inexpensive storage platform such as S3, and then they back that up so that they're safe, they're compliant. But within these network services, like by themselves, there's not much to back up. And of course, there are many, many more services that can interact with your application, such as analytics, machine learning, monitoring, identity management, and so on. Once again, there's generally no concept of backing them up as is, although the data that you're feeding into, say, an analytics platform or the data that's being used to train your machine learning models, you probably want to have that backed up because that's core IP. And once again, these data sets are generally either stored in or exported to S3, and then that's backed up. So in short, the only thing that you really need to worry about backing up in a cloud native application is this section that I've kind of encapsulated in a dotted line. Disaster recovery is, of course, another story. Like you probably want to replicate all of your critical components across different regions for a live active in an active DR architecture. But from a backup standpoint, as long as you have a safe, immutable, and preferably air-gapped copy of these core data services, you should be good. So, now that we have an idea of what kind of a cloud native application looks like, let's dig into what the data types that we see customers generally, backing up. So I want to state up front, even though we're a backup and recovery company, it is definitely not a good idea to just back up everything wholesale. You want to classify your data. You want to be judicious about what data you back up. And the first step to that is identifying the key categories of data that you should seriously consider protecting. So the obvious one is customer generated data. This generally includes everything from, everything that's either created or used by customers. So this could be document uploads, it could be media such as images and videos, it could be customer profiles, user profiles, and so on. These can reside in different forms across your persistent storage, some within SQL databases, some within NoSQL databases, some in S3. But in general, it is good practice to identify and retain a backup copy of this customer data, since permanent loss of this data can lead to direct loss of revenue and customer trust. The second is data that is subject to regulatory compliance. Depending on the industry that you operate in, this could range from health records, financial transactions, employee information, in some cases like food safety records, environmental impact reports, and so on. So the reason you want to back this up is that loss of this data can potentially lead to steep fines in the future if you're audited. And there are a lot of regulatory agencies that are generally enforcing long-term storage and immutable backups of this kind of data. So it's generally we see customers in the healthcare, the financial services, the manufacturing, energy spaces back up a lot of this compliance data. The third category is proprietary information. I touched upon this earlier. Like non-public information is often a big target for ransomware and other malicious actors who are either trying to breach your sensitive information or steal it. So whether it's IP or company secrets or employee information or material non-public information such as financial projections that can move markets, it's a good idea to retain an immutable backup copy. And then finally, companies today often retain troves of information for analytics and machine learning in vast data lakes or data warehouses. So business intelligence and forecasting relies on this data. Machine learning models are trained on this data. Developers often use these for testing their applications. So it's a good idea to back all this up to keep services, like internal services especially, up and running in case of an adverse incident. So all in all, I would say 90% of customer data that we've seen, and we've seen hundreds of petabytes of data, fall into one of these four categories. So these serve as good milestones for you to classify data as you kind of make progress with really bucketizing your data in these different data sources and identifying what's critical to your business and what's not. So, okay, we've learned what a cloud-native app looks like. We've learned what kind of data, cloud-native apps generally you want to protect and back up. So let's just introduce, I'll spend a couple of minutes just introducing you to Clumio and what we do. So customers choose Clumio basically to do one of these four things. Near-term operational recovery from accidental deletions, recovery from malicious attacks such as ransomware and wipeouts, long-term data retention at a low cost for compliance purposes like we talked about, and overall optimization and consolidation of backups. So if we just think back to the things we talked about as to what needs to get backed up in a cloud-native app, Clumio can essentially help you automate the backups of all of that. This includes critical or regulated information in your databases, whether it's a managed database or a self-hosted database. And then this also includes data lakes and unstructured data, including earlier what we spoke about, like config files, logs, user information, and so on. And of course, run other applications and critical data that may be leveraging EBS, EC2, as well as file services. And Clumio also does organizational data protection for M365. So Clumio can essentially help you automate the backups of all of the things that you see on the left for the use cases that you see on the right. So we've talked about, the basic business principles as to why you would want to back up your data. So let's do like a little bit of a technical deep dive here. So Clumio, and I think Ron mentioned this when he was teeing up this presentation. Clumio is the only backup solution in the market that's natively built on AWS for AWS. And we are expanding to Azure and OCI as well. But our AWS platform is like, it maximizes the usage of distributed systems within AWS, and I'll just draw it out for you here. First things first, a cloud-native backup solution must back up all persistent data stores, not just one or two, right? Because applications are built leveraging multiple different data services, 4 to 5 on average. So to that end, Clumio has among the widest coverage for AWS data sources, ensuring like application-level resilience across different workloads. So one of the most elegant things about Clumio is the simplicity and ease of setup. Like when we say we're cloud native, we believe that you should not have to, order licenses or go through this extensive pricing and packaging process or order hardware. Clumio literally takes 10 minutes to set up, like no servers to deploy or configure or manage. The only thing that Clumio needs to deploy in a customer account is an IAM role. So no servers, no third-party agents, no security vulnerabilities. And it literally, you can deploy Clumio through either Terraform or CloudFormation. And in general, it takes less than 10 minutes to set up. Clumio then sets up a dedicated, logically air-gapped and immutable, always encrypted AWS account, which will house your backed up data. So this is within the AWS backbone, so we ensure that backed up data never touches the public internet. Unlike a lot of traditional vendors, Clumio does not do a bulk copy of data sources from one place to another. Instead, we interface with the individual services at an API level. And this depends on the workload, right? So for S3, we use S3 events. For DynamoDB, we use time streams. For SQL Server on EC2, we use transaction logs. For EC2 and EBS, we use direct APIs. So all of this enables very high fidelity continuous backups, which enables point-in-time recovery across these data services that power your cloud-native application. And then this kind of brings me to the most important differentiator and kind of the secret sauce to Clumio's 10x RPO, RTO performance. And we call this the Clumio serverless workflow engine. Once again, unlike other backup vendors that are based on server-based architectures, Clumio is built as a completely serverless data processing pipeline. So this gives us unparalleled dynamic scalability. Clumio deploys functions for backups, for optimization, for searches, restores, which are all dynamically scaled up and down based on the customer task. So we don't have the necessity in your account or in the Clumio account to like deploy EC2 instances and deploy agents on that, nothing of that sort. So that's the key innovation here at Clumio, the orchestration engine that powers the processing and the life cycle of these functions that do your tasks. So you can almost think of this as Kubernetes, but for Lambda functions. So it's an orchestration engine for serverless functions. More important than performance, though, is that it lowers costs because we don't have to keep these EC2 instances on in our account or yours. And this generally results in about 30 to 50% cost savings for the customer. And then all data on Clumio is stored on immutable scale-out storage. And unlike legacy vendors, we do not need file systems to store, optimize, and index data. So this makes it super easy, super low cost, and in most cases, faster performing than any other vendor out there. And finally, Clumio supports multimodal recoveries. So if you need to prove compliance during an audit, you can simply SQL query your backups. If you need an application to instantly access your backup data to maintain uptime, you can do that too. If you need to restore, like do a full restore of your instance to a different account or region, Clumio's got you covered there as well. So depending on, we realize that different customers have different restore needs, and we enable different restore modalities to suit those needs. So all of this really comes together to make Clumio like we believe, the most differentiated and value-driven platform for cloud-native data backup. In fact, we're so confident in our architecture that we encourage customers to try us out and test us like anytime against any platform that they may be using today, including some of AWS's own tools, actually. So, this is a pretty hefty technical deep dive. So I'll just like quickly summarize what this means to customers. A lot of customers, especially hybrid cloud customers, they want to port their on-prem VM-focused backup solution to the cloud, which is almost always a not so good idea. You see, when you want to back up a cloud-native application, you want it to be completely hands-off. You want your backup provider to automate all your core backup functions, store it and secure it, and then restore it quickly when you want to, right? The problem with porting over your on-prem vendor to the cloud is that they almost always rely on you to store your own backups in your own account while they only orchestrate it for you. So you have to pay for the storage, and the responsibility of securing the backups relies on you. In addition, you have to pay like a license fee for this orchestration as well. And we covered this earlier, but there is the need to run these heavy file systems to optimize the backups. But guess where those file systems are deployed? They're deployed in your account, right? So you have to pay for that compute as well. So in short, like the ownership model of bringing on your on-prem vendor to the cloud is very wonky and can get very expensive. And here's how we think it should work. Your backups should be your backup vendor's responsibility, period. Their storage, their security, their orchestration, customer support, everything. And you should not be expected to run anything in your own account, because if your account is compromised, your backups are compromised if you're running it in your own account. And backups being the last line of defense, you do not want that to happen. So we believe that you as the customer should only be responsible for paying a simple, transparent, consumption-based fee, nothing more than that. The reason that Clumio can support all of this while legacy vendors cannot comes down to the way it's been architected, the stuff we discussed on the previous slide. It's cloud native and serverless from the ground up. So let me walk you through some real world results of one of our most favorite cloud native customers, Atlassian. Atlassian, as you probably know, is one of the world's largest project management company and has several massive brands under its portfolio, such as Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket. At Clumio, we are very fortunate to be backing up Atlassian's Jira Cloud, which is over 40 petabytes of data. So as you can see from the stats here, they were trying to use a specific set of tools to back up their environment, which is pretty large, and it wasn't going so well. So, it was taking too long to back up, too long to restore, inconsistencies in backup data, hitting API limits. But because of the way Clumio is architected and its focus on cloud-native applications, Clumio was able to back up their entire environment without a hitch. So what took them multiple weeks to restore now would take them a few hours. And all of this while saving them a ton of money. So the lesson here is that, to do cloud-native backups, you should really choose a purpose-built cloud-native backup solution. And Atlassian is one of the many companies that have chosen Clumio for their cloud-native backups. We're proud to call, cloud leaders in media and entertainment, industrial and manufacturing, legal and risk solutions, as well as e-commerce as our customers. So, I guess that's my time, but if you have applications that you have built in the cloud or recently migrated to the cloud that you want to modernize and you want to simplify and automate their backups, we'd love to show you a demo. Our mission at Clumio is that we back up so you can build, whether it means building your business, whether it means building applications. We want backups to be autonomous, invisible, and not really something that you want to think about on a day-to-day basis. So that's pretty much all I had. Just head over to Clumio.com. You can try the product for yourself or just contact myself or anyone else at Clumio for a demo. But thank you again, and I can hang on for some questions.